After surviving thoracic air leak syndrome in Toronto and weighing just 115 pounds, my doctors made it clear. In order to be put on the transplant list, I needed to gain weight and build my strength. Today, I'm taking you through a pivotal moment in my life, my time at a respiratory rehab facility in Toronto. The day I moved in, I was greeted by two roommates. One, a retired executive at the Toronto Stock Exchange who was content despite his health challenges. The other, a survivor of cardiac arrest that had happened a few weeks prior. He was also retired, but radiated bitterness and spent most of his days just yelling at the TV. Living with them was eye-opening. The retired executive seemed to be content and at peace with his situation. His family visited constantly and he was always upbeat and cracking jokes. In contrast, my other roommate was just a storm cloud of anger and often complained about how dysfunctional his family was. Their stories were a living lesson for me. Similar battles, yet worlds apart in spirit. One found joy amongst hardship, the other living in a self-made hell. It showed me a future to avoid at all costs. So what's this place like? What's the atmosphere like? Well, I'm by far the youngest person there at 29 years old. Most people have COPD, usually by smoking, or idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. It's very quiet and people don't talk too much. Some of the patients there are in really rough shape. They're on oxygen permanently, so it can be difficult for them to maintain a conversation. And I'm including myself in that bucket. When I would go for a walk, I couldn't walk and talk at the same time. I either had to walk or sit down and talk. There was two wings next to ours where the long-term patients stayed. These would be patients who were permanently bedridden and often were breathing through a tube and needed 24-hour care. It was a very depressing area to be in. The staff placed a high value on independence. I remember one time my roommate was asking the nurse if she could get him a jug of water. She responded saying, "This is rehab, just do it yourself," which honestly I found to be hilarious. Like, the guy's old and brittle and can barely breathe, like, help him out. But at the same time, I get what the nurse was trying to do. Like, we need to maintain our strength because if you don't, you just will continuously deteriorate. It wouldn't help in the long run. There was one patient, let's just call him Frank, that I particularly felt really bad for. Not necessarily health-wise, because he was in much better shape than most of the patients there, but he was just defeated right from the get-go. He was probably in his mid to late 30s, if I had to guess, and he had COPD from smoking, and he was trying to get on the transplant list. He was always saying things to me like, "No one knows what we're going through and we're too young to have to deal with this." You know, kind of always a pity party. And fair enough, like, we're both young and realistically, one or both of us could be dead within the next few years. But that kind of thinking literally doesn't get you anywhere. So to be honest, I really just found him kind of annoying to be around. Every Friday I would get picked up by a family member to go to my parents for the weekend. That way I can kind of have home cooked meals and kind of get out of the hospital setting for a bit, which was really good for my mental health. I remember one Friday in particular, we're driving out of the parking lot and I see Frank at the smoke pit, bumming a cigarette and light it up. So that was incredibly depressing to witness, and honestly I'm not sure if he even made it onto the transplant list. On the flip side, I had some other really inspiring moments. It was incredibly boring being there, and I decided I was going to try and read through some of the classic novels. I read The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. If anyone hasn't read it, it's literally just a novel about an old man catching a fish, an 18-foot marlin. This one paragraph really spoke to me in my situation. This is the internal dialogue of the old man, pretty much at the height of this grueling battle with this marlin. The 1,000 times that he had proved it meant nothing. Now he was proving it again. Each time was a new time, and he never thought about the past when he was doing it. Surviving life-threatening conditions like acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and then receiving a stem cell transplant, each time required a new bout of strength and resilience. Just like the old man in the novel, each battle required me to prove my resilience again and again, independent of the successes or setbacks of the past, and regardless of whether anyone was watching. I mentioned to another patient, an older woman, that I was reading this novel and she asked to borrow it. She reads it, and at our next conversation, I kid you not, she brings up the exact same paragraph, because that was inspiring to her as well. Overall, walking through those quiet halls, receiving tough love from the staff, and witnessing a different perspective from my roommates, I feel like I learned a lot about life, resilience, and the human spirit. After months of grinding, I finally gained enough weight. I completed rehab and was strong enough to be discharged. And then the long, uncertain wait began, the transplant list. As always, if you found value in this video, consider sharing and subscribing.